the Lord is available to us also, the same way He was available to Peter. He is ever ready to take up our problems and issues into His hands because He is eternally interested in us. We should be willing to call upon Him in our distress and give heed to His directives, which are ultimately meant for our own benefit. The Bible says, "Commit your ways to the Lord, trust only in Him, and He will bring them to pass." All the three stages given in this verse are critical, are important. Commit your ways to the Lord, trust only in Him, and He will bring them to pass. We should not trust in our own abilities. We should commit our ways to the Lord. Then, while the work is in progress, that is, while we are being led into something by His Spirit, we should still keep trusting in Him, rather than shifting our focus back to ourselves. And finally, we should praise His grace with humility and continue to live in obedience after He delivers us. I recall an interesting incident mentioned in the Bible in this regard. Once the disciples were guided by the Lord to cross over in a boat to the opposite shore. Remember, they began their journey as per the Lord's command. But midway through the sea, they encountered a furious storm and they panicked. Herein, I would like to point out the fact that even when we walk as per God's instructions, difficulties can still come in our life. But in all such situations, in all such difficulties, God has His own purposes and ways to deliver us if we remain open to His voice. Now, in their attempts to save themselves from drowning, the disciples started rowing as powerfully as they could. Interestingly, Jesus was aware of their situation and was following them from behind. He was walking on the tempestuous sea. If we look at this situation from a third person or neutral perspective, we'll notice the following facts. Firstly, in their frantic efforts to save themselves, the disciples were actually rowing away from Jesus, who is the source of their deliverance. In fact, we can safely say that they were rowing away from their deliverance. Now, how often does this happen? When we try to work out things on our own, and when we try too hard, we actually tend to lose sight of the ways God brings into our lives to deliver us. Next, the disciples, even though they tried to follow Jesus' commands, they were trying to do it by relying on their own ability. Never did they think about Jesus during the entire episode, despite His saving efforts for them during an earlier storm. They were blinded by the storm to such an extent that instead of thinking about Jesus, they were thinking about themselves, and they were thinking about ways in which they could row harder and somehow get out of that particular problem. They were blinded by the storm to such an extent that when they saw Jesus walking on the water, they felt that a ghost was following them. Even when we claim to walk with the Lord as per His instructions, we shouldn't lose sight of Him, His presence, or His words. And if we do not allow our focus to drift and continue to maintain a good relationship with Jesus, not only will He deliver us from troubles, but He will also teach us great lessons through them in order to equip us for eternity. Jesus did deliver the disciples from the storm, but He acted in a very different way this time. God employs different ways to deliver different people from similar conditions. And sometimes as given in this incident, he uses different ways to deliver the same group of people from a particular condition when it repeats itself at a later time. In all our troubles, God's ways of delivering us are different. If on the previous occasion Jesus had to rebuke the storm, this time he just had to enter their boat for the storm to calm down. God does this so that our trust does not shift away from him into the method that he uses to deliver us. God does not want our trust to move away from him into the methods which he employs. So, if we follow God's voice carefully, just like how Peter did, and just like how the disciples, in fact, failed to do, if we follow God's instructions, we can achieve spirit-led deliverances on a material or physical plane. For some of us, the problem is different. It's not about impossible situations, but about people who are impossible to deal with. If you are a victim of jealousy of your superiors or colleagues, then do not be sad, but be glad because you are in good company. The superiors of Joseph, David, Moses, and Paul were all jealous of them at some point in time. Joseph was sold as a slave, as I said before. Moses and Paul and even David had to flee from their countries to save themselves. And Paul had to endure a lot of oppression from his rivals in spite of being an honest and faithful person. If others are jealous of you, then let them burn with their own fire and let God correct them in his own ways. Pray for them, but make sure that such people or their acts do not take away your joy and peace. In addition to this, you should also pray that the Lord would turn around your situations in his own way and deliver you from their clutches. In the Bible, we read about great men and women of God who achieved awesome feats by relying on the power of God. Truly speaking, they were all just ordinary people like us. Also, the factors that made them unique and different from others were no secrets either. There were simple and well-known things like faith, humility, obedience, and faithfulness. Like all of us, these great people also had their own troubles, hindrances, and difficulties in their lives. But instead of getting frustrated by them, they faced them with a holy boldness that comes from the Lord. They converted the difficult circumstances into pathways of God's glory by seeking his will and following it. That is, by being led by his Spirit rather than by their own intellect. They heard him, listened to him, accepted his words with all humility, obeyed him faithfully, and accomplished his purposes for their life, and hence became his favorites. Dear child of God, we too are presented with similar opportunities. Can we make it large? Do we have it in us to follow him humbly and gently and receive all the rewards? If we praise earnestly, then we certainly can. I pray that the Lord would deliver you from the problems that are troubling you today. Be it sickness, financial problem, family problem, or a problem caused by some other people. I pray that the Lord would deliver you from whatever problem, whatever impossible situation you are facing today. Having said this, however, if God remembers you in your bad times, then you should not forget him in your good times. Many of us are guilty of complacency in our faith life after receiving the initial deliverance to our most distressing and disconcerting problems from the Lord. After the initial spurt of zeal and enthusiasm, many of us start taking things and sometimes even God for granted, and that's where complacency sets in. Complacency can be very dangerous. King Hezekiah received a great deliverance from the Lord regarding his health condition. In fact, God mercifully extended his lifespan by 15 more years after he cried to him in prayer. However, a little while later, the same king became guilty of exposing Jerusalem's wealth before the spying Babylonians. God rebuked him for doing so through his prophet. But since the words of warning and punishment were meant for the next generation, Hezekiah did not bother to pray or to seek God's mercy or intervention in the matter. Apart from their sins, Hezekiah's complacency also contributed to the fall and captivity of Judah to the Babylonians in the years to come. Therefore, we should continue to live in and by the Spirit of God and resist the temptation of complacency, even after the Lord delivers us from the key problems, critical problems that we are facing today.